now going to invite the three presenters to join me up here on the panel so that we can take questions and answers. We have about 20 minutes, so please raise your hand if you have any questions, comments, suggestions. Okay. We'll just wait for the panelists to get up and then we'll...
I'm Rianti from local government in Indonesia. I have a question for Ragavan. On your last slide, you mentioned about how this study or your activities have expect involvement from national government. Did I get it right, or like? So, I mean, it has created space or something that can get the attention from the national government. From studies that I have read so far, like in Australia and also some studies in Indonesia, one of like creating involvement of local communities to gain or developing their own or documenting their own coping mechanism, or what you can say, so some adaptation at the local level is one thing, but also getting this plan to be adopted by the government, by either like the intermediate governments or even by national government is another thing, and sometimes that can be hard, and also it becomes the barrier for sometimes involvement of community, and they will say, there have been a fatigue of this exercise, and at the end there's nothing happen, and so what's suggested is early involvement of local government within this exercise. So what's your view on that? Thank you.
Okay, do we have additional questions? Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm Amy Schweikert from the Institute of Climate and Civil Systems in University of Colorado. My question is both for Mr. Suresh and Mr. Cañares. I was curious, Mr. Cañares, in your presentation you said that local communities need to be empowered to participate in vulnerability assessments. And I think you painted a very clear picture of how the interaction between local and national governments is being addressed. I was curious what you mean about local empowerment. How has that been done? And how have you seen that be effective at that level? And almost a reverse question to Mr. Suresh, you articulated very clearly how you have empowered local communities and been involved with PRA and different assessment tools. What is the response that you have seen from the local and national governments using these tools and the very clear results that you talked about? Has there been a response, and what does it look like?
Okay, thank you. Yes, Jose.
Also, a question to the second speaker now. Regarding, we have this tool that you use to try to connect different governance systems, but you have a political system there that's supposed to do this. What is this? Why do you think this method is going to work? And what is the advantage in comparison to the governance system in place, the political system in place? Why you think it's going to be better in terms of results?
Okay, thank you. Yes, we have a question down here in the front.
Yes, I'm Krishna Tiwari from Nepal. I have queries about for the first and second presenter. We talk about the local governance, but now the climate change policy mainly come from the top, from the international agenda, and then they focus to the, but particularly in the, like the developing country like Nepal and others, because international community, they force for the making the policy and these things, and even in local They are not aware about this thing. Even the leader, we agree about this, how to sensitize these to and implement, endorse these things, even including the budget through the local to the national levels. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other lingering questions for now? All right, okay, let's take one more at the back, and then we'll turn back to our panelists.
Thank you very much. I'm Felix Asante from the University of Ghana. My question goes to the presenter on the climate change scorecard. You mentioned that on those islands, for the last 40 years, there hasn't been any minister or government official going there. And I'm wondering the type of governance arrangement on the island. Is it a neglected island, or what is happening? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Felix.
And then lastly, do they even vote? Because, I mean, politicians need to go to those islands to make sure that, to convince them to vote for a government of the day. And if for 40 years, no minister or no top government official has been there, then it's a source of concern. Thank you. Okay,
thanks, Felix. Okay, and if I just might pose a question to Eero. I'm wondering at your point about these post-national processes or these international initiatives maybe reinforcing central government tendencies. I'm wondering how much you think that might be reflective of the cases that you chose with Mozambique and Tanzania, as you mentioned, are very dominant party states. And so whether these international initiatives are really just reinforcing characteristics of governments that are already there, and whether you've looked at, or maybe talking a bit more about the Ghanaian example, whether you've seen different results in that context. Okay, so maybe I first turn to Raghavan. There were quite a few questions about the scorecard.
I'd like to combine the first two questions, the involvement of the national government and degrees of response from local to the national level, why it works, why it doesn't. There are two important themes, that underlie this. One, that of constructive engagement. This needs to be defined. Constructive engagement means engaging in a non-threatening way where both sides learn from each other. And that is reflected in the language of the engagement, the spirit of the engagement, and the content of the engagement, right? Very often as academics, as researchers, as economists, or whatever, the labels we bring with us cloud our capacity to engage in the correct language and the spirit of this engagement. A lot of the talk that we have shared here in the past 2 days will be unintelligible to an ordinary person in the place we're working in, where the average literacy rate for males is 47% and for women it's 38%. So translating this into an idiom that is intelligible to both sides is critical for constructive engagement. A scorecard is something that comes naturally to almost everyone. Everyone knows how to rank and score or rate someone's service. Therefore, it becomes a useful instrument by which we can transform perceptions, opinions into solid facts with regard to quality of service delivery. All right? Now, once they have been intelligently constructed into a scorecard, it requires important facilitation. It's not an easy task, I can tell you. It's just that with 20 years of experience, we know now how to do it naturally. Once you've done that, that means once you've got a good instrument, you then have a power that cannot be ignored. Any government servant, any politician needs to respond, because this actually is opinion that has been converted into fact because of the statistical array of tools that we have utilized to prove. And parallelly, we've worked on scientific evidence and the regulations analysis to tell the government that, look, it really doesn't work. It's not just a feeling of somebody on ground. So the construction of this kind of a tool is very important to be able to motivate those in power to want to respond in the first place. Secondly, the point I made during the presentation was that you are partnering people. You're not telling people anything. While we were working with communities, government was equally aware of what we were doing. Many times local government officials came with us to ground situations to listen in on conversations that were being held. We must not paint everyone in the government system black. there are intelligent individuals there who want to work, to deliver public services. Identifying those people and bringing them along is also a critical part of this work. I think that is part of the answer, and I'll come back later.
Okay, great. Michael, I think Amy had asked about what you meant about local empowerment in your presentation.
Maybe a sort of a backgrounder on how responses on climate change are being done in the country. One strand is how governments do it. And governments essentially rely on the data of vulnerability mapping that is done by national agencies, and then talks about how this can be addressed by the local governments, for example, in the project that I was talking about in the context of the case study. But the other strand, of course, is the one that is popularized by non-government organizations, when you have participatory vulnerability mapping assessments, which are done essentially by communities, and communities actually saying what is it that they would like to do about it, relying on local knowledge and blending it up with scientific knowledge available from the scientific community. So I think you have a constructive engagement, as what Suresh has been pointing out, at one end for NGOs with very limited funding and with very minimal reach as well. But then you also have that kind of imposition on the part of national governments in how they do their work. So I mean, that's how you look into the context of how actors are actually responding. As to the question of how you would like them, the communities, for example, to know, responding to the challenge of information. Currently, I don't have an answer for that, but a colleague of mine is working on analyzing information transmission channels of both scientific knowledge and of legal knowledge regarding climate change, for example, in the context of the country. I'm not aware yet of the findings, but I think it's a move forward, because like one of the critical things that are actually playing in this discourse is the fact that you have so much knowledge somewhere there at the top, but then you have very little seeping through at the bottom. So analyzing the information transmission channels is, I think, very, very important.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if I comment to the point that how this post-national condition particularly appears in certain kind of countries and the political systems and political tradition, yes, I think that there is a very, very strong connection with this. There's 2 points which you had to separate somehow. One is the character and nature of the United Nations Framework Convention, which gives very strong sovereignty for developing countries to apply the different kind of carbon trade mechanism, and it's purely voluntary nature. But at the same time, as I mentioned in my paper, that there is national tasks which needs that the government organize the task if it takes them. The other thing is that even in our material, and although it's a very tentative study, there is a difference between Ghana and the 2 other countries, and I think it's because the different kind of political system. There's a 2 competing party system, and these parties are changing, and there is more space for civil society organization. And of course, if we are moving to other places, it's totally dealing with this political tradition and political system.
Okay, do we have any additional questions? Yes, please.
Hi, thank you for very interesting presentations. My name is Taina Hanhikoski. I work for the Finnish NGDO platform to the European Union. I have a question for the first presenter. You mentioned that in the development plans, only 6% mention climate change, but a lot more, over 40% mention disaster risk management. Have you tackled the fact that it might be a question of language, and you might be sort of actually talking about the same thing, but with just different names, and that the development plans might not be able to name the issue as climate change? Or is it safe to assume that the development plans are able to identify and name the issue as climate change?
Okay, thanks. Do we have other questions? Okay, then Michael, this idea of language.
Interestingly, development plans in the Philippines are in English. So the community development plans, the executive legislative agenda, these are not actually in the local language. So when we analyze development plans, for example, we actually map out all terms that could probably be related to climate change and look at that in each of the text of the plans. But as what I mentioned, it's only about this disaster risk reduction and disaster preparedness that these are that we can see somehow that kind of a relation. Probably because this could be one of the easily accessible and fairly understandable implications of what climate change is. Like in the context of the country, for example, there have been, in most recent years, there have been increasing amounts of cyclones and floods. And then to frame the argument of climate change along that line would be more accessible than doing it by some other language that you would like to have. So, but rest assured that when we did the textual analysis of all the plans, we actually looked into each and every possible term that could be primarily associated to climate change.
Okay, any final questions? Okay, I'll ask the panelists if they want to make any final points.
Yes, I needed to respond to this issue of why politicians should or would respond to a scorecard. On the one side, we have the political system and the bureaucracy, and the other side, we have ordinary citizenry. What is it that distinguishes them? One is what Michael just mentioned, an asymmetry of knowledge. Knowledge is available, concentrated on one side, but not on the other. The other is an asymmetry of voice. The government or the bureaucrats or the politicians can set rules. The citizens can't set rules the other way for them. They just have to obey. Then there's an asymmetry of redress. If there's a problem, you have to approach them to get something clarified. They don't approach you to sort it out. In other words, there's no early warning system saying your system is failing, so we better do something about it, at least not in our country. And there is an asymmetry with regard to institutional engagement. A government office or a politician's office is a formidable structure in itself. You cannot just approach it or enter it. There are pathways inward. What a scorecard approach does is to break all these asymmetries in terms of leveling them, creating common knowledge, creating common redress mechanisms, creating at least the basis for common voice in a platform, creating a common institution, a platform where everybody can discuss these things as equals, okay? Now, when this happens, when a scorecard happens, there's no going back because knowledge has already been shared. And the pressure builds, and there's no way a politician can refuse to respond once an asymmetry is squared or leveled off. That's the belief with which we work, but over the past 25 years, using citizen report cards, we see it at work. We have seen chief ministers bend and listen. We've seen very big people stoop in order to cover up their tracks because corruption has been exposed. We haven't mentioned all that in this presentation because it is related only to climate change. But public service delivery is founded on asymmetry, and scorecards level these asymmetries. Therefore, it works. That last point about islands, the islands are largely uninhabited. I just ringed them to tell you that they won't be there in the near future. I am telling you that politicians haven't visited the coast at all, never mind the islands. Okay, they are so marginalized that nobody is bothered to visit them. They have gang leaders who come and buy votes at election time, so they don't have to come personally for this.
Okay, thank you. Michael or Eero, any final points you want to make? No? Okay, well, I've really enjoyed these 3 papers because I think they really provided a nice complementarity and differences across perspectives, regions, and methods. And I mean, even though all 3 of these papers were very much focused on climate change, they brought up these issues of accountability, knowledge transmission, government responsiveness, and effectiveness, which are of course are relevant to broader issues of good governance and a whole host of other development issues. So I'd like you to join me in thanking our panelists.